Well, look, thanks for coming. I appreciate jumping on. But what I like to start with is before even getting into the financial services industry, what were you even doing before that? Is this like college to that, or did you have other stuff?
No, you're dialing back, and like I got to go way back.
Way back. Time machine.
How long do I have to? I mean, I can talk about I was born, and then
what was before the financial stuff?
Yeah, so strangely enough, the reason like all of this kind of transpired is I had the most circuitous route through college of probably anybody I know. Like I was a normal kid, grew up in a small town, but decided, hey, at 18, I'm going to college. And didn't really know what I wanted to study, so I was an international business major. And my junior, so I studied French because, all the major international business transactions happen in French, right?
Of course.
No other language jumped out at me, and I thought it sounded amazing. So I'm like, let's study French. And I thought it'd probably help like for dating and stuff like that.
There it is.
Yeah, that was really it. Little did I understand, like it didn't come with like a inserted French accent that you could carry with you to make you unique, right?
Yes.
So
You're
it didn't
the
really
American
do me much
trying
good.
to speak French.
Correct. Yeah, it was just dumb American trying to speak French. So I went to college, and my junior year of college, I got really sick and ended up in the hospital and had a viral infection that they never really diagnosed. Nobody ever figured out what it was. But like at the time, so I'm 21 and I'm in the hospital. I'm running a fever every single day of like 105, sometimes 106. They're telling my parents I've got everything. Like they're like, he's probably got cancer of some sort. Wow. He's probably not going to make it out of the hospital.
Wow.
Like we don't know what's wrong with him. Yeah.
Now, did you go to college near your house? Like parents were there?
So interestingly enough, it was over a break. So I was actually back home visiting my parents in Kansas City. I was about 3.5 hours south of there.
Okay.
And so I was actually at home when I got sick. And, for the first week of being sick, you just lay in bed, right? Nobody thinks anything of it. But then I wasn't getting better. And my sister finally told my mom, like, you probably should go take him to the doctor and see what's wrong with him. And they admitted me to the hospital that day. And my white blood cell count was like off the charts. They're like, he's got something wrong with him, like seriously wrong. And so I'm in the hospital for a month after that. And it was the same thing. It was like having the flu for a month, basically.
Wow.
And it was, and you're sick, so you don't really think about it. But I tell people, I'm like, so I weigh about 185 now. I lost 57 pounds in that month. I came out of the hospital at about 120. And so you can imagine, like 6'1", 120, I did not look the greatest.
No.
So then I ended up not going back to school because I had to, like, take some time and rebuild my energy and my health and all those things. And so I took a year off school and started working in the casino industry. Strangely enough. Yeah. So they were really popular, starting to come like online in Kansas City. They had just built some properties. So I started working there, and the good and bad of that particular industry is if you work really hard, they will promote you regardless of your educational experience. So I started getting promoted quickly, and they kept promoting me and promoting me and promoting me. And, I had to pay off this medical bill. My parents didn't have health insurance on me because this is well before you could carry health insurance on someone until 26.
Oh.
So at 21, I was on my own for health insurance. I didn't have any.
A month in the hospital.
A month in the hospital.
Wow.
Running all sorts of tests. I think the medical bill was like $70-some thousand. And so I started working. I started paying that back. I kept getting promoted in the casino business, and I'm like, well, maybe this is going to be what I do. And it was a lot of customer service, and at the time it was fun because I was young and 21 years old. Casino business, kind of a fun experience.
Great environment.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like at 21, yes. At 48, probably not.
No.
But yeah, so I went to work in the casino industry. I thought I was going to Vegas, and started training in Vegas and doing some different things in Las Vegas, which I'll tell you a crazy story later. But
okay.
And then just it was a couple years into it, and I started looking around, and I started realizing the guys that were in the casino industry all had similar profiles. They were so they weren't Italian, and the only people that owned them were last names, very Italian-oriented names. Like the family I worked for at the time was the Fertitta family. It was very well known in Las Vegas. And all the other people around them that were really, really owners in it were cousins and uncles and brothers and stuff. And the people that were working there were very well educated, but they were all going through divorces. They were all working nights. They were all working weekends. And I started looking ahead and thinking, at 50, is this what I really want? You know, at 21, 22, this is fun. But at 50, I'm like, is this fun?
Good foresight.
Yeah, and it was really strange. It was kind of this epiphany that I had. And I'm like, I got to get out. And so I decided to exit and go back to school. And so I went back to college, re-enrolled. Most of my credits had expired for the most part, so I kind of had to start over. And at the end of my first year, again, this crazy story, my mom has a heart attack and passes away unexpectedly. Yeah,
sorry,
so
man.
You want to talk about he's already, like, people are already like, man, this is depressing. I'm getting off this conversation. But so strangely enough, very normal life. Everything's going kind of as a plan. Then all these things kind of derail stuff. Go back to school. My mom has a heart attack, passes away. She's gone. My dad owns a house. He's like, I can't afford this house. I can't afford our expenses. What am I going to do? So I moved back in with my dad for a few months. We sell the house, get everything squared away, and I go back to school again. And I changed schools, so this time I decided I was going to Kansas, and I went to KU. When my mom passed away, I was like, all right, I got to find a better alternative. So I went back to Missouri State, where I had started, because my credits, I could get some of them going again. And so I picked back up, and I was studying computer information systems. But I had to do another 3 years of that before I graduated. And so when I got out, and I had my CIS degree, I'm looking around at jobs, and all of them remind me so much of what I was doing in the casino business. It was, work for the company for a long time. Maybe you move up, maybe you don't. It just, you have to put in your time and your hours and all this stuff. And I'm like, I don't love that idea. And so I got introduced to somebody in the financial planning industry. And they're like, you can have your own autonomy. If you do a good job, you really can name your own income for the most part. And all of a sudden I'm looking at it going, okay, I like the sound of that. And then what really was the linchpin in it was they were like, and you get to help people plan ahead for unforeseen circumstances and education planning and retirement planning. But if something comes along and derails that, you can help them plan for that. And I'm like, well, that basically just explained my whole life right there, right?
Yeah. If you'd had that all in place, what a difference it would have made.
Yeah, and it's a catch-22, right? Because you look at it and you go, well, if I had it all in place, I probably wouldn't have appreciated the challenge of going through all of those things and the learning curve from paying off a big medical bill or watching what happens when someone passes away and there's no planning done. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's like, man, that would have been so much more beneficial if I hadn't had to go through those hardships and get penalized financially for it and have to dig my way out. Like the emotional toll those things take on you is enough, and if you didn't have the financial toll on top of it, it would have been better.
True. Yeah.
And so that's how I decided to get into the financial planning industry.
Did you have to go back to school, or is there some certification you can take?
Yeah, most of the stuff after that. So once you have a degree, then all of a sudden you have to just get the licensing that's necessary from an industry-specific perspective. And so then it was just, okay, now I got to go past the 6, the 63, the insurance exams. And all those were fairly study for them, go take them, pass.
Others, I say CE hours like it's continuing, but was there hours to lead up to that? Like, hey, you need 30 hours before you even take that stuff, or you just study, pass, and you're good? You really have to be sponsored by somebody, so you've got to be affiliated with a firm of some sort. But once you have that affiliation, then it's just, go study and pass. How'd you pick your firm?
So, again, I met somebody on the college campus who was a representative, and her mom had just died. strangely enough.
Wow.
And we had gotten on this topic. I don't even know, like, I didn't open with that. Like, I wasn't like, hey, I'm Aaron. My mom just died. But we were talking, and through that conversation, she had mentioned something about having to attend, like, this service for her mom who had just passed away. And so then it became this natural conversation, because it's like, okay, I can empathize with you a little bit. You know, I've gone through that myself. It's a tough time. And so she introduced me to her husband, who was the head of the office at the time. And I don't even remember really what he said. He may not have even said anything overly enlightening to me. You know, I'm in my 20s. I wanted freedom and flexibility, and I wanted an opportunity to make a good lifestyle. And he said, hey, it's Tuesday. You want to go play some golf? And he took me to a country club, and we had lunch and played golf. And I thought to myself, okay, well, if this is what your job is, I think I'm going to do it, because, you know, I'll do whatever it takes if this is what you get to do. It beats the casino
gig and the computer information systems gig.
Yes. Yeah, it beats sitting behind a computer for 8 to 10 hours a day writing code and talking to nobody, which I was not well suited for. They would have fired me pretty quickly, because I joke when my CIS class, my very first, like, upper level CIS class I went to, I sat down next to somebody, and they were typing away on their computer, and I looked over and said hi. And the person kind of looked at me, like, with this fearful, like, look in their eyes, and they got up and moved to the other end. I'm like, this is going to be a really long educational experience. So I knew that wasn't a good route for me.
Yeah.
And the casino industry was great, but man, I worked 19-hour days some days.
Yeah. It's just not for the long haul. Like you said, it seemed kind of cool in my early 20s.
Oh, it was awesome.
But at least you caught it early. Because you could have been mid-30s going, man, what have I done? Like, where do I go now?
Yeah, I remember my boss telling me, he was in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, and I remember him coming to me and being like, hey, listen, I'm going to be out for a little bit. My wife and I are going through a divorce, and, you know, and not that there's anything wrong. He was smoking like 3 packs of cigarettes a day, and very unhealthy looking, and again, I'm not judging anybody based on their lifestyle choices, but I was like, is that what I want my life to look like when I'm 50? I'm like, how do I divert now and maybe look ahead? So yeah.
Wow. And so past the test, was the educational stuff pretty, not say easy, but like you could take the course, memorize the test, pass, or was it like didn't make it? Because that's a hard one. I hear that those are difficult.
Yeah,
like Series 7 and
the 7's hard. You know, so the series, like, you can get in and depending upon your affiliation, right? So different firms have different standards for what they ask you to pass when you come in. For me, it was a life and health exam at the time, and like the 6 and 63. And those were relatively easy. You know, study, pay attention, you can get through them. And I think for most people I've experienced, that's the case. But then you get to the 7, and when you start getting into options trading and learning some of those things, it gets more challenging. And so my 7, I got like a 65% or 66% the very first time, and you have to have like a 72 to pass. And I decided, okay, it's probably better I hire a tutor. And so I actually went out and hired a tutor, and she met with me for hours and did a class and a tutor, and then I went and passed it just fine. And,
Smart.
You know, it's like all things. It's like once you pass, you're done, right? You don't have to, like, you do your continuing education, but you don't have to go back and redo the test every year. Thank goodness.
Thankfully.
I mean, I'd probably be out of the industry if I had to do that. And I think a lot of people would.
Yeah. So now how long have you been in now?
So 21 years.
Wow.
In the industry as a whole.
Nice.
And you know, it's interesting, and I don't know if you can attest to this, but it's interesting when you're one day walking around and you're the young person in the office, and then you wake up and you look around and it's like, I'm not the young person in the office anymore. I'm now the older person in the office. And it's a little strange.
It is.
It's like, where'd that time go?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. What's your favorite part of this business that you're in?
It's still people. I'm fascinated by learning just about people. And although you can't tell, like, because we're talking and you're asking the questions, but I think that's probably the most intriguing thing to me, is being able to ask people questions and have them sit there and think to themselves and look at me and go, these are things I've never even thought about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just fascinating because everybody's got a different story. People have different ambitions and different objectives for what they want to accomplish. And I think just being around people and listening to the different stories and what's made them successful, what's made them who they are, but then also what do they still want to accomplish in life is probably the reason that this industry still fascinates me to this day.
Well, and especially what you do, right? That future planning. A lot of people don't know how to even get there, nor the questions to ask themselves.
I think that's a big thing. Or, like my mom, they just bury their head in the sand. It's easier, out of sight, out of mind. Don't talk about it. She never would have these conversations with anybody. But I think one of the things that's really fascinating to me is watching highly successful people. Like they've had success in industries or they've done really well in their business and they've made lots of money. And yet they still almost have an uncomfortability about how to handle their financial future.
Yeah.
And that's always fascinating to me. I'm like, I have a client that was worth $100 million or so. And yet at the same time, he'd been so good at his business. And at the same time, he would look at me and be like, I don't really know what to do with all the money, though. Like, and I asked him what his biggest concern was. And strangely enough, say $100 million, his business valuation, he had plenty of money. And he's like, my number one concern is that I lose it all.
Lose it all. Yep.
And I remember asking him that question and thinking, well, that was probably a really dumb question, right? He probably doesn't have many concerns. He's worth a whole lot of money. And sure enough, he was just like, just losing it all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, wow, like there's no point in time where some people are at a point where they're just like, I'm good and I'm not fearful. Like there's always something that might concern them.
Yeah. Well, doing this for so long, when you ask that question and do you find that different age ranges have a different relationship with money?
To some extent, I think people, you go by decade, and I think younger people have that ambition a lot of times, right, to go make money. And people's perspective does change. I think as they get older, and as I see my clients in their 70s, 60s and 70s, a lot of it then becomes around legacy and what am I going to do? They come to this moment of I've made all this, but I'm obviously not going to spend all of it. So now what?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
But that's the later 50s and 60s?
That's probably 60s and into 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that middle group's interesting. Like early ages probably don't appreciate it as much, and they probably are more materialistic. I'm also speaking for myself because I think that's a lot of how I was too. And then that middle ages, those 40s and 50s, I call those the successfully clueless ages, where they're successful and they're doing well. They want more, but they don't know why they want more necessarily, or often can't articulate it, because a lot of people now, and I say this in what is our age range, right, this 40s and 50s, a lot of the people I see don't ever see themselves walking away and being done with work. And so they don't really have a clear picture as to why they want to accumulate as much as they do. They just know that they want to accumulate more. And it's not necessarily because they're like, oh, I need another house or a better car, or I don't have education funding figured out for my kids. All those things are done, but they still haven't been able to define like what all this is for.
Right.
And they're like, well, I want to be done sometime, but I don't know when.
So you're asking them questions to kind of draw that stuff out.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
If you get an opportunity to even talk to them.
Yeah, it's interesting though, and I say hopefully primarily because sometimes even when I ask the questions, they still stare at me a little bit with deer in the headlights, where they're like, I hear you asking me that question, but I can't articulate the reasoning behind why I want to continue to accumulate more. Mm-hmm. And so they don't they haven't even defined that own clarity in their own minds. And so sometimes then we just have to sit on it and be like, okay, well, when you figure that out, let's have another conversation.
Do you then still look and say, hey, what are some of your plans long term? Like, hey, do you have long-term care? Is there some parents that you might have to take care of, some siblings you might have to take care of? Like, do you drop some of those questions in there?
Yeah, I try not to lead too much into specifics. So I ask a lot of very open-ended questions, like, hey, paint the picture for me what your ideal life looks like in 10 years.
Okay.
And then I just sit there and listen. Because I think sometimes if they don't know, right, and I say paint that picture, then they start to be able to tell me a little bit more about how they envision their future looking. And that tends to, I think, open it up a little bit to giving them some clarity that maybe they've never thought about. And then I'll ask them questions like, well, walk me through if we hit that objective in 10 years, right? Does that mean you're done with work? Are you going to continue to work? How do you feel about that? And that's usually what it revolves around. It always revolves around like how long they want to work. What's their longevity? How long are they driven to make the kind of money that they're making before they decide, hey, I've got enough. And then I always ask them about the balance, right? Because I have a great appreciation for people who put family ahead of money. And only because of my own personal experience, right? If my mom... Because I go back to her and I think to myself, she died at 48, which I'm 48 now. So there's that moment of like, holy cow. But I always think like, she worked and she would work 60, 70, 80 hours a week sometimes. And not because she was driven by money. I mean, my family was in a situation where she felt she had to do that to kind of make things go. But I always think back and I'm like, would she have traded, 30 hours a week of work for family time? Like, would she ever have had that regret or that moment of, I wish I'd actually spent more time with family and my kids rather than spending it at work? And so I just want people, like when I work with them, I have a high appreciation for the people who say, listen, I'm working so that I can have freedom to spend time with my family. And I will always put the person who's got that value center over the person who's like, what's my rate of return, Aaron? Why did you get me 1% less than this or 0.5% less than that? Because I think our values wouldn't be in alignment then if it was all around the money. I mean, listen, I've got to do a good job. We have to, be competitive in that landscape. But at the same time, I also want to make sure we know why we're doing it.
Yeah. So let's talk about, I was talking about playbooks, right?
Yeah.
And for your business, so you've been obviously successful in the business. You've been in it a long time. What's some of the routine things that you're doing with your current clients, the ones that you currently service? Is there annual reviews? Is there monthly check-ins? Like, how does that operate in your world?
Yeah, so one of the things that's interesting about today's landscape is now more than ever, people lose trust quickly. It's faster than ever.
Why do you think that is?
The speed of society has changed. I read, whether it's true or not, I read an article a while back that said people begin to lose trust in you after 3 weeks of not hearing from you.
Wow.
And I thought, and then I thought about my own personal situation, much like I think you're thinking right now, like, is that true? I think there's an extent that starts to become somewhat true, right? Which is out of sight, out of mind. We're inundated with so much stuff nowadays. So like I'm old school. I love the phone call system. I still make a lot of phone calls. And sometimes it's just, hey, how are you? We have our routine. So we've got people on a quarterly, like this is, we have a specific quarterly check-in where we are talking about specific parts of their plan, performance, taxation, whatever it is. But I'm really big on let's just make phone calls every week to people and check in and say hi.
So did that study, the 3-week rule, we'll call it, did that influence you more to reach out even more, or you were already doing it?
No, it definitely changed my perspective and had me start planning ahead more for connecting and being more, I think, dynamic in how we reach out to people.
And by dynamic, what do you mean?
Just being more on top of it instead of being static and sitting in the background and being like, well, we don't have a call scheduled for them until 3 months from now. Let's not talk to them.
Yep.
One of those where I have some clients, I talk to them once a week.
Okay.
And it's not even because I think they're like they need it. It's just I realize it's probably a good thing to just check in with them and see how they're doing. Sometimes it's because they're widows. So I work with some women who have lost their spouse. I probably check in on them once a week. And I know that sounds strange, but I'm like, they're going through some major life transitions. And I want to make sure that they know that at least someone's there for emotional support if they need anything.
That's nice.
And I blame my grandparents for this. My grandpa, when I was a kid, used to drive me around to houses of the elderly ladies in the neighborhood. And he would make me deliver them fruit baskets, but then I would also have to sit there. And they would tell me stories, sometimes for hours.
Wow.
And I'm like, maybe that's like it's his fault that
What
that
did
happened.
he do? Did he have a fruit stand?
No,
A farm?
He was a farmer.
Okay.
He owned a farm, and he was just really big and active in the community.
Wow.
And so, he was like, listen, it's the summertime. You're not doing anything. You can come with me and deliver these baskets.
But he was already doing it.
He was doing it, and my grandma would do it. So they would prepare, they were in their 60s probably or 70s, and they would prepare these baskets for these elderly women who lived in their own homes, who were probably in their 80s. And sometimes even older. I think there was the one lady that I'll never forget. I mean, I'm probably 6, 7 years old. Her name's Gladys. She was blind, lived at home by herself. And she had to be almost 100. But my grandpa would, be like, hey, you're taking her a basket today. And I would sit in her living room and she would tell me stories for hours.
Oh my gosh, how cool is that?
Yeah, so it's a strange thing. But I think today that also gives me a little bit of perspective for why, I was telling my assistant, I'm like, it seems a little bit weird that we've got this group of widows that we are working with and helping. And I'm like, I almost feel guilty about it because I'm like, people are going to be like, are you taking advantage of like elderly women? And I'm like, no, I'm like, I feel an obligation to be there to support them. And so I'll check in with them a lot is the
That's
point.
good.
Like, on a weekly basis, just making sure they're okay.
Do you still take that tradition on and gift them anything or bring them stuff?
I don't. I probably should.
I was going to say that's a great way to stay in front of them too.
The difference is my grandpa owned a farm, and so like some of the things he would give them came off the farm.
Right.
I'd probably be at Fry's, and they'd be like, "Can you stop buying all of our bananas? We need them." So that is a bit of a difference.
Yeah, but cool. I mean, we talk. I do a lot of this with real estate, with lenders, and a lot of that is just it's another touch to your clients is some small, impactful, personal gift, and also to incorporate almost like a milk route.
Yes.
Right, but that's cool to bring that back, to honor your grandparents. Say, hey, I'm bringing this back to my clients.
It's funny you mentioned the milk route, just because I don't know if you had that as a kid. Like, did they deliver milk as a kid to your
No,
neighborhood?
I've only heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think about that, and you think about, can you imagine having somebody who ran a milk route today?
No.
No, right? It's like beyond all of our comprehension. But if you did. And do you know how many people would probably subscribe to it because of the like uniqueness and the memory and I think there'd be a little bit of nostalgic feel to where people would be like, yeah, I'm going to subscribe to this person's milk route because I want that feeling of my childhood or whatever. And I think people are missing that. So I think that connectivity, and especially why I make the phone calls to people so much today, is because everything's social media driven, right? So when I see an Instagram post or I see someone tweets, that's great, but that's not hitting you like somewhere emotionally deep. When someone gives you a phone call and it's like, hey, I was thinking about you.
Yeah.
And it's on a regular basis. It's like, okay, maybe this is striking me a little bit differently.
Now, do you do anything else beyond that? Meaning, email, not canned, because that doesn't sound like you, but a authentic market update, things that are really your interpretation of what's really happening with the news, the markets, etc.
Yeah,
maybe planning.
We do a little bit of that through the natural progression of like newsletters and periodic publications. Going back to the weird stuff, I sit down at my desk every Monday morning and handwrite out cards to people.
That was my next question.
Yeah.
So you do handwritten notes.
Handwritten notes.
Nice. How many do you typically do?
I 3 to 5 a week.
Cool.
And it can be to anybody. Like I'll read an article of somebody in a business journal that I don't know.
Nice.
And I will just handwrite a card and say, "Hey, I read this cool article about you," and I'll clip it out and send it to them and just say congrats.
That's great.
And I did that a while back to a friend of mine. He had an article written about him in the business journal here, and I hadn't talked to him in a little bit, and so I just clipped it out, hand wrote him a card, and just said, "Hey, really cool to hear about your success and loved reading about you and hope you and your family are doing well." I think it was probably within 5 minutes of him getting that, he called me and was like, this made my day. This made my week.
Yeah.
He's like, nobody's done this for me in years.
Mm-hmm.
So I probably should do more on the like weekly market commentary stuff, but you're probably much more likely to get a handwritten card from me that just says, "Hey, hope you're having a great day."
I like that.
Yeah.
Well, that's just way more impactful, right? I think the newsletters and market updates are just kind of mass. I'm just staying in front of them, so it's kind of like the 3-week thing. Like, hey, I'm in their inbox, and then later on there's you made the phone call, and then a few weeks later here's the handwritten note. By the time you're there, now it's time for your quarterly review, and now it's on repeat again. So it's just another touch.
And I think the other thing is, this is you may notice this. You don't see somebody for a while, you don't talk to them for a while, and then you're together, right? And there's that, I'll call it relationship tension that exists in that first moment of brief, like, "Hey, good to see you again," but it's been a while,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, we've got to pull that barrier down, then we can actually have our normal interaction.
Mm-hmm.
By these little interactions along the way, if people would do this on a regular basis, what happens is that initial, "I haven't seen you in 3 months or 4 months," that initial little bit of relationship tension that might exist in the very beginning is gone.
Yeah, it might not even be there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, "Hey, I feel like I just saw you.
Right.
What are we talking about? Let's get into it."
You catch up right away.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now let's talk about prospecting, right? So do you use that when you're like, "Hey, I'm reaching out to people that I don't even know," writing a handwritten note? Is that part of prospecting for new business, or are you in retention mode of your current portfolio?
Interestingly enough, I went through that, recent like transitional time frame where I went into shed mode, where we were at a point of over saturated in the number of people we were trying to serve.
Okay.
And I almost, so 21 years, I almost hit a complete reboot button. Like, and I want to say that in a way that is mindful. I didn't get rid of anybody. Like, I didn't call people up and say, "Hey, listen, I don't want to work with you anymore." But making a transitional change, I also let people know, "Hey, listen, here's where I am. If you want to continue working with us, let us know." But I didn't actively like go out there and chase people around for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
In the hopes that the people that I really wanted to work with came with me.
Mm-hmm.
And the others that were on the fringe, decided, "Hey, listen, we'll do something different."
Did it work?
It has so far.
Good.
So interestingly enough, prospecting wise, I'm in a different state than I had been. So for the first 20 years, I couldn't get enough prospects, right? It was, how do I always get more? How do I always get more? And how do I get better? Now I think the difference is, how do I become more intentional so that we drive the right people to us versus just the most people.
Right. And what's some of that intentionality look like?
I think first it starts with that values-based discussion, right? And I think also differentiation. So like for me, I think most advisors are always in prospecting and growth mode. And so when they're in front of you, there's this natural tendency for them to be like, "Hey, I'm talking to you, but I'm also thinking about who else can I be talking to that you might know."
Ooh. Okay.
Right. And then they hit you with it at the end, like, "Hey, do you know anybody else that would be interested in this conversation?" I don't know if that happens to you.
I've heard in various businesses, including this one. Yes.
I think a lot of advisors do that. Like, because they're always in how do I grow? How do I grow? How do I grow mode? I'm in the let's do the opposite mode, which is let's focus 100% on you. And at the end of this, if you're blown away by the experience, if you feel like I've hit the nail on the head and we've done a great job for you, then we don't want to work with everybody you know. But who else wants an experience like this? Right? And who do you care about enough to say, I don't know what your person's doing, what your advisor does, but you should have a discussion with Aaron because I think it's going to be different. And instead of me going in now with people and it's like, hey, how do we get them as a client? And how do I talk them into working with me? I want to do the opposite of that. How do I create a unique relationship with them and see if it makes sense for us to even engage in a discussion around their financial
Well, it takes it from
world.
being transactional to relational is the first thing that pops into my head with that.
Yes.
But also you can serve them at such a higher level when you're on that relationship level with them.
Absolutely. And I would almost rather like, hey, let's do this. Let's go play golf for 4 hours with you and my client, who I have a good relationship with, and then you can come along and, we'll play golf together. Maybe we add a fourth person to the group or something. And if after 4 hours we like each other, then we can have a conversation.
Right.
Right. And if after 4 hours you're like, hey, I found you to be insufferable on the golf course for 4 hours, and I really don't want to talk to you ever again.
Good fit.
Yeah, great. And it's interesting because I know you like to play golf, right? Have you ever spent time on a golf course with someone, and at the end you're like, boy, I don't think I'd like to work with them very closely.
Yes.
That's kind of how I am, right? Like, I'm like, man, if I spent 4 hours with you on the golf course and I look at you at the end of the round and I'm like, I don't think I would like to do this.
Back.
Yeah. Like, great. I'm glad I enjoyed the round of golf because this is not a client, right? And
that's a good filter, though. You really get to know people that way.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be golf. It could be anything, right? Yeah. Anything you do for a few hours with someone.
But I look at one of my realtors says you never want to have commission breath. Because they'll just take any deal, take any person, work with anybody, and it's suffering at the end, right? Where this is total opposite. This is, hey, we're gonna hang out, I'm gonna learn about you, and then maybe we do business, maybe we don't. It's okay.
And maybe that's an age thing, right? I think when I was youthful, it was more of the, hey, do you have anybody that has a pulse?
I want everybody.
Yeah. Somebody that can, talk to me and have a conversation, and I'd love to sit down and see if I can convince them to work with me.
Yeah. Now you can be more selective on, hey, are we going to be a good fit?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So moving forward, how much of your time is spent with that new acquisition versus retention? I mean, it sounds like it's very high retention mode, it's low in the new mode.
Yeah. I actually... I have a marketing firm actually working right now on a plan to try and use what we're doing that's unique to draw clients that we would want in.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of letting them run with the new client side of things where I'm like, I'll focus on making the existing clients we have happy.
Okay.
So I would say right now it's 90-10, 90% retention, 90% let's make people feel really good about what we're doing.
I love that.
Yeah.
So with the marketing people, what's kind of some of the things, just 30,000 foot view, that they're going to be doing?
Yeah, they're doing all of the regularly scheduled social media, posts, and I'm really not good on social media. Like that's not something that I spend much time on.
Mm-hmm.
My wife has been on me for like a decade about how irrelevant I am in social media land. And so they're focusing 100% on that. Like, how do we tell your story? And how do we get it out there to more people? Because they think we've got a story to tell, right? They think we've got a very positive story in this industry to tell, uniquely positioned with other advisors.
Right.
And they're like, so how do we do that? Like, how do we tell that story to people so that the people who are like you are potentially attracted to having a conversation with you? So that's what they're doing.
I like that. Is there anything outside of social? Are they doing any print or?
Doing print. They're doing they're going to have me write a blog.
Okay.
Who knows? They might have me do a podcast.
Nice.
Maybe a guest on a podcast or something like that, probably more so. And then they're just going to do regularly scheduled interval discussion like points with clients, making sure we're emailing and communicating with them that way through all of the different channels. And so that's they're really big on that. And they're like, we think you're missing an opportunity.
Yeah. I like that you hired it out. Like, it's not a strength of yours, yet you see the gap and you're like, all right, I'll hire that out.
Yeah, 100%. I'm really good at understanding my limitations. And one of the things that I think I've learned most as a leader over the years was all the people that you hire should be your counterbalance, right? And if you can focus on the things that you do really well, right? Kind of that like play to your strengths. Like, what is it I do well? I meet with people, I have great discussions. I usually ask really good questions, and I listen pretty well. And I can help them think through things that otherwise haven't been thought through. What do I not do well? Everything else, right? Paperwork, detail things, not my strong suit. Social media, not my strong suit. So if you can find ways to outsource the things that you don't do well and focus on the things that you enjoy the most and you're really good at, I think that's the win in business.
You'll almost never work a day in your life.
Correct. Yeah, right? It's that idea of, I'm not really working here. I'm just doing what I do and loving it and enjoying it. And if it's profitable, even better.
So last question, if you were to fast forward 10 years from now, still in the business?
10 years from now, okay, I have a 9-year-old, so she'll be 19. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because I think this new iteration of the business especially is going to let me have a better longevity because it's more of a lifestyle business. It's, make the type of income that I want to make, but do it with a smaller client base that I can be more ingrained with on a day-to-day basis.
I like that.
And it's like if I serve less people and I make the same level of profitability, like why would I walk away from that?
Right. So what would change over the next 10 years, or where do you see your business in the next 10? Is it just simplified, less people?
Yeah, I think it's continued to evolve in some way. Eventually, I think that the next 10 years also needs to be what's the legacy plan for the business? How do I bring on a younger generation of people who aspire to run something so that it'll do two things. Number one, I think it's going to be important from a client perspective to know that, hey, once you're retired, I'm not left out to start over, right? Because some of my clients are my age, and they're like, well, wait a minute, if you retire, same age I retire, who's helping me? So I think there's got to be this decision on how do we create a legacy plan for a generational wealth firm that transcends just me.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think that looks like? You're going to identify a couple people and...
fortunately, because of what I did previously, most of the people that I worked with were younger than me by, sometimes 15, 20 years. So we'll see, do those people have, a good long-term plan in place about what they see and how they aspire from a career perspective, and is there alignment?
Right.
But, this industry, it's not hard to find people who want to enter and learn that are younger. So most of the time...
It's just so they align with your values, your standards, and going to mesh with your clients.
Correct. That's the big thing. You just got to find the right personality match.
That's awesome. I look forward to watching that unfold.
Yeah, me too. I'll tell you when we get there, right? Yeah. I'll call you and be like, hey, I'm fishing in Costa Rica, so I transferred the firm to some other generation now.
And there it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Hey, I know I said last question, but it just dawned on me with the kids. Do either of your kids want to maybe do anything like this?
So I've got 3 kids. That's a great question. I mean, you're not quite where I'm at yet on the age side of things. So you'll learn that I don't think my kids have any clue what they want to do in life as of yet. And as a parent, one of the reasons now I look back and realize when I was young in the business, no older people wanted to work with me, is because as a parent, you watch these kids do all sorts of dumb things and you think to yourself, I can't leave them a multi-million-dollar firm. They can't even show up to school on time. So I don't know. I still like my 9-year-old a lot, so maybe she's got a future. We'll wait and see.
Do you ever plant the seeds, or?
I talk to him about it. I have one, my 15-year-old daughter, and she's like, "What you do is the most boring, stupid job." And I'm like, "Okay, this is teenage talk coming out, right?" She's like, "I would rather drown myself than do what you do on a day-to-day basis." And I'm like, "It's a little extreme, but
Not a candidate yet.
I'm guessing this is what I wouldn't start with in the interview process if you decide to take this over, but." Who knows? I mean, maybe someday. My oldest is a boy. Maybe he decides from a business he really wants to get into real estate. I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe he'll do that.
Hey, and you never know. They might start something else and then come back around, or maybe you just find somebody else.
Yeah, it's
nice that they'll at least have that option and opportunity.
Yeah,
that is pretty cool.
I never want my my dreams and my goals and things that I found to be important to be forced onto my kids, right?
Yeah.
And in some ways, there's a 50-50 part of me that doesn't want to leave something like this to them. Like, I want them to have to work their way through understanding what it's like to, like, you hand someone a multi-million-dollar firm, and all of a sudden they go from living under your roof to making a lot of money. Like, sometimes that's really bad.
Right.
Where if they don't have the wherewithal to know what it's like to maybe struggle for something,
Yep.
they may not appreciate it much.
I agree.
And so I almost want them to go out and be like, "Hey, listen, go out, figure it out on your own, and maybe someday they can come back and they'll have more appreciation for it."
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I like that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, man. Thanks for coming in, brother.
I love it. I'm glad. Thanks.
This is awesome.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.